The Palisades fire is now being called one of the most destructive in LA history. What factors have converged to make it so catastrophic?
We have a series of a few key factors that all came together at the same time to create these really dangerous circumstances. The first is that there was very little precipitation in the fall or the early winter, and so things are really dry. Then on top of that, we've got the Santa Ana winds. Now, that's a natural, meteorological occurrence in Southern California that happens during the fall and early winter, and it's associated with very dry air and high winds, including significant wind gusts. But this particular Santa Ana wind event is one for the books. It's a very, very severe version of it, and those two things converged, and we had fires that were close to communities, and we've seen devastating impacts.
And so I just want to talk about the timing of this and how unusual it is. I mean, here in Australia, we've been busy fighting fires because we're pretty much smack bang in the middle of our fire season. To see, LA doing this at the same time is strange, to say the least. I mean, should we be even thinking in terms of fire seasons anymore? Or do you think this is a sort of outlier event?
Well, it's on the edge of when we typically see the big Santa Ana wind events. Usually it's October, November, December, the ones that cause the big fires, that drive those big fires. But early January is certainly within the range. The main thing is just the intensity, the severity of this event, and the scale of the community impacts. It's not something we've seen before in Los Angeles.
One of the lamentations we're hearing is that the communities in and around the fire grounds weren't properly prepared for an event like this. And some say that the vegetation in the areas should have been removed or greatly reduced. Is that, in your view, an effective prevention strategy?
Well, it is in a narrow sense. There's three things that really make a difference, and there's a lot of science behind this. Whether in terms of whether homes survive a fire. One is what we call home hardening, and that's simply making the home itself more fireproof, more fire resistant. Things like ember-proof vents to prevent the flaming embers from being driven by the winds into an attic space, for example, getting dry leaves off the roof. Simple things like that make a huge difference. The second one is what you're alluding to, which is defensible space pruning. And really what that is, it's just pruning very flashy vegetation, small diameter combustible vegetation within 60 feet generally, and at most 100 feet around homes. The first 30 feet from the home is the most important. Mostly we're talking about dry grasses here. In LA City and LA County, it's actually a requirement to do this every single year. And so, the city and the county support this, but the problem is that a lot of people are not aware of that. They don't have the financial resources to do it. They don't have the physical ability to do it. And at the state and federal level, we have not, as a society, allocated the resources and the funding to create programs to ensure that the people who can't do it physically or financially, that they have the support to make it happen. And that's one of the big gaps right now in our fire management issues.
Why do you think that gap exists? Why is it that these policies are not being implemented properly?
Well, I think it comes down to the history of our wildland fire management policies in the United States. At the state and federal level, the focus has always been out into the wildlands, that fires are something that happen out there, and we can go out into the wildlands and create fire breaks or remove trees, remove vegetation, do logging projects under the rubric of terms like thinning or fuel reduction, and that somehow that's going to stop the fire from reaching the town, removing vast areas of shrubs or trees. The problem is that it's not working. It really never worked, but especially in the era of the climate crisis, when these are really weather and climate-driven events. Bone dry conditions, extreme winds. We've seen winds gusts at 160 kilometers per hour, hurricane force. No one can control a fire like that. And what we have come to understand, and what the science is supporting now, is that you cannot stop fires from reaching these towns, because, and especially with all this vegetation removal, it's actually making the fires reach the towns faster in many cases. It's making the fires spread faster because there's not as much of a windbreak. And so the issue is, if the fires are going to happen, and if we can't control them and prevent them from reaching the towns, how do we keep people safe? How do we safely evacuate people and their animals? How do we keep homes from burning? So the good news is we actually do know how to do that, and the science is really strong, supporting the key means and methods that we have to use to do that. The bad news is policymakers, politicians have not yet made that shift in policy and backed it up with funding.
And I suppose this is something that is increasingly urgent as we're seeing the effects of climate change, as we're seeing these wildfires get sort of bigger and more destructive over time.
It absolutely is increasingly urgent. We have communities that are in harm's way now that weren't not so many years ago, and we have extreme weather events, the likes of which people haven't seen, at least in living memory, and the stakes are simply too high. This is not a partisan issue, at least it shouldn't be. And this is a time for us to come together and pay attention to the science and allocate the resources and make the policy shifts that are necessary to save homes and save lives. If we do that, it will be very successful. We will save thousands of homes and a great many lives.